A very good afternoon, sir. Mr. Heng Swee Keat, Minister for Education, Republic of Singapore. Mr. Michael Palmer, Speaker of the House, Singapore Parliament, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Institute of South Asian Studies Singapore, or ISAS for short, and Aspen Institute India, I warmly welcome you to the special address by Minister Heng. Minister Heng will deliver his special address on the subject, Educating Every Child, the Key to Sustained Development. Without further ado, may I request Mr. Tarun Das, Founding Trustee of Aspen Institute India and former Chief Mentor, Confederation of Indian Industry, to say a few words and introduce the Minister. Mr. Das, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for this special session with the Minister for Education, Mr. Heng Swee Keat. We were partners in crime some years ago, Minister and I. India was going through birth pangs, very difficult birth pangs, of negotiating and concluding its first quote-unquote free trade agreement called the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement with Singapore. And the Minister was then Permanent Secretary for Trade in the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Singapore, which is the equivalent of our Commerce Secretary. I think he was running through different Commerce Secretaries as he was negotiating. And it was very important for Indian industry to be on board and to understand this process, to be involved and to be supportive. I had the privilege of working with the Minister at that time to understand his concerns, to actually get his trust, which I valued very much. And it was a privilege to partner our government and the Singapore government under his leadership at that time in making this SECA happen. And as the story goes, SECA has led to a multiplication of trade and investment. Potential is much, much more, but the man who made it all happen is sitting here in a new incarnation. I have a second point to make about him, which is so relevant to India and which will strike a chord amongst all the Indians sitting in this room. This system of meritocracy in Singapore, this system of getting the best people to get involved in public service and to take leadership. He was the Permanent Secretary for Trade. He became the head of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is the equivalent of our Reserve Bank of India. And then last year, he stood for election for the first time. Was he dragged reluctantly to stand for election? I don't know. But that was a transition from being an administrator to standing for election. And after the election, he became the Minister for Education, a new cabinet minister. And I think this is such a wonderful system to look at. Completely alien to India, of course. We are from Venus and you're from Mars, as far as this is concerned. But I think a system which commends itself so much. So Minister, great to have you here, and we are all looking forward to this session with you. Sitara, are you going to make the announcement? Ask the Minister to come up.
My pleasure. Please take a seat. Thank you, Mr. Das. Minister, sir, may I request you to be on stage to deliver your address, please? Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Gautam Thapar, Chairman of the Aspen Institute of India, Mr. Jamshid Godrej, Chairman Emeritus, Aspen Institute, and Mr. Tarun Das, Founding Trustee of the Aspen Institute of India, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman of the Institute of Salvation Studies, and Professor Tan Tai Yong, Director of ISAS. Ladies and gentlemen, first let me thank all of you for attending this warm-up session before you meet the Prime Minister. And I also like to thank my parliamentary colleague, our Speaker of Parliament, Mr. Michael Palmer, Dr. Janil, Dr. Faisha, and Mr. Gan Thiam Poh for being here to support me in this. I think somewhere in my last incarnation, Tarun and I must have been somewhat intertwined in our lives, and intertwined in a way that sort of gets me to come back over many years to keep working on collaboration project with India. And it's my great pleasure to be back here today. As Tarun said, he was my partner in crime. In fact, more than a partner in crime, he was a very wise advisor who tried very hard to bridge the differences at the beginning on both sides and help me understand the complexities of India and the complexities and concerns of Indian industry. And it was only with his very wise counsel that we managed to get a very important comprehensive economic agreement. And I'm glad to see that in the few years that it has been implemented, trade, investments, people-to-people linkages have increased so significantly. It seems that, after the deal, one of the things which I wanted to work on very much when I was doing the deal was that it was important for financial linkages to increase between our two countries. So in a very unprecedented way, we awarded 2 licenses for qualifying food banks to Indian banks. And when I was a governor in our central bank, I was pleased to be able to award one of the licenses to the State Bank of India, and had many interesting discussions with Governor Reddy then in the RBI. We worked very closely together during the global financial crisis. And then now in education, again I have the pleasure of signing an MOU yesterday with your Minister for Labour and Employment, and to have our ITE, Institute of Technical Education, build a world-class skill center in Delhi. And I hope that we can make a modest contribution to India's efforts in developing your human resources. Now this afternoon, I'd like to talk about education and why it is key to sustained development. But at the outset, let me say that I think in Singapore we run a good education system. I get parliamentary questions all the time about education system. And although it's a good system, there are really many areas that we must continue to improve on. So I take this very much as a sharing session, and I hope, if you have any comments for us to improve, please feel free to raise it afterwards. I will touch on 2 key things. One is that I will trace the history of our education system and how it's linked to economic development. And second, some brief words about where I hope our next phase of educational reforms will lie. Now first, education has multiple goals. And that a good education system basically develops a unique individual, develops his full potential and allows him to fulfill his aspirations. Second, education has a social role to appreciate our roles and responsibilities in society so that we can contribute to our society and to our national development and to the global community. And third, education supports a competitive economy, and that a quality education is a quality labor force. And these are 3 very interrelated areas. Now, I would now touch only on the third limb of this in the subsequent part of my speech. So I hope that no one goes away feeling that I'm looking at education purely from a very narrow utilitarian viewpoint. That's not my intention. Now let me say a few words about Singapore's development and how our education has kept pace. Now in the earlier phase, from the time that we became self-governing in 1959 to about 1978, I will characterize our development as basically industrialization phase and the country as in a survival mode. Because in 1959, we gained self-government from the British. In 1963, we formed a merger with Malaysia. In 65, we were kicked out of Malaysia and we became independent only in 1965. And during that phase, a key problem that we face is you have a society that is multiracial, multilingual, and a growing young population needing jobs. And therefore, industrialization and building a cohesive national identity was our key challenge. But at the same time, it is a time where we have very limited resources, because when the British pulled out, we were really stuck. And the question is, how do you simultaneously develop the country and yet provide education, which is so critical for the future? So the solution was mass education. The school that I went to, and many of my parliamentary colleagues went to, were really cookie-cutter schools. Every school was like every other school, standard model, built right across. Teachers were recruited in huge numbers, and the idea was have every child go to primary school, and then where they can go to secondary school. So that was a phase of survival. And at the same time, some vocational institutions began to crop up, and technical education. And the idea was educate our people so that they can at least take a job in the industry. And simultaneously, the Economic Development Board attracted investments, bring in foreign direct investments, and factories sprouted up all throughout Singapore. So it was really like, the Victorian age where everything is mass produced. But I think we did solve the unemployment problem, and we did provide basic education to all our kids. Now, by about 1979, I think our economy has begun to take off, but other economies were coming up too, the new Asian tigers, and we're facing competition. And the only way to sustain the growth was to go into a capital-intensive, skills-intensive phase. And during that phase, we find that our education system, unfortunately, the mass system did not quite produce the desired results. In fact, we had very high attrition. To give an example, about half of my class, or half of my cohort of students in my primary school did not complete the primary school leaving exam, did not pass the exam. And wastage was very high. So Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew then brought in a team of what we call systems engineer to study how to re-engineer the system. And the result was what we call streaming, grouping students by different abilities, and improving the standard of maths, which at that time was of an extremely low level. Many students fail maths and science, and then bring it up to a very different level. And at the same time, we expanded university education, expanded technical education, so that economy could be restructured and move into a capital-intensive and skills-intensive phase. Now, by about 96, just before the financial crisis, and when the financial crisis struck, we're beginning to think that the financial crisis was more than just excesses. That the financial crisis in 96, 97 signaled a very important change in the Asian economy, which is that with many more countries and many more people joining the global labor force, it was time for another phase of economic restructuring. And that phase of economic restructuring was to move towards a knowledge-based economy. And in moving towards a knowledge-based economy, our education system must also change, so that it's a much more ability-based, aspiration-driven system. And a series of very important changes took place during this period, in particular to broaden the range of skills that we expect of our students, to raise the quality of education, to devolve autonomy to our schools, and to shift from just being efficient to being flexible, to provide more choices, and to raise quality. Now, in 2008, we have another global financial crisis, and this time, I personally think that the global financial crisis, having dealt with it in the central bank, that it is more than just excesses. Again, I think it signaled a very important shift in the global economy. And we are hoping to move towards this student-centric, values-driven education We started it last year, and I'll be happy to say a few words on this. Now, throughout this, I think there are three constants that guided us in this effort. First, we're a very small open economy, a small economy. And for a small economy to do well, we must stay open and remain relevant to the world. For us to engage India, for instance, we have to ask ourselves, how are we relevant to India as such a big economy? If we cannot answer that question, the economy cannot grow. And second, we have zero natural resources, and therefore human resources are our most important resource. And therefore, I think we probably put in enormous amount of effort compared to many countries to develop each and every one to the fullest. And third, we must never forget that we are multiracial, multi-religious, multicultural society, and that it is important that we have a sense of togetherness as one people. So those are the constants that have guided us throughout. So in order to achieve all this, I think it's quite critical that we first start with the basic foundations. Without getting the basics right, whatever we want to do thereafter will not succeed. And there I think in our primary school, we focus on basically 4 subjects: English, Maths, Science, and then the mother tongue, which is an important part of our multicultural, multiracial society. And for us to be different, because we are not a Chinese society, we are not an Indian society, we are not a Malay society, we are a Singaporean society, and we are not an English society. And what must be unique about Singapore, but at the same time, we must retain our links to our heritage, and we must retain our link to the rest of Asia and the world. So start right from primary school. There's a focus on mother tongue and the 3 key subjects. Then in the secondary school, education between 4 to 5 years in different types of setting. And then finally junior college, polytechnic or Institute of Technical Education, and then university. So that's a basic structure. Now, we put a very strong emphasis on science, technology, and engineering and mathematics. All our students do maths till class 10, and in fact, about 3 in 10 will do 2 maths subjects. And all our students do science, and again about 3 in 10 will do 2 subjects, and several would do all 3 science subjects: chemistry, physics, biology. And in half of our courses in the university, and 2/3 of our polytechnics and ITE courses relate to science and technology. You may ask why this obsession with science and technology, and there are 2 key reasons. One, I think any good citizen, any good global citizen must have a literacy in science, in the sciences. It is going to shape our lives in many profound ways, we like it or not. And second, if you're thinking about career, I think there are no jobs that will not be impacted by science and technology, and in particular by ICT. Whether it is media, whether it is logistics, whether it's even fashion, book distribution and so on, there is no sector of the industry that will be immune from the impacts of ICT. So giving that foundation to our students is critical. Now, the other part is that as a result of all this effort, I think 99% of every cohort of students from primary school progress to secondary school, a far cry from the days when half my class failed the primary exam. And second, in the international rankings, we, I think, have done well in being the top 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 in various measures. I recently met the Vice Chancellor of Oxford University, and he told me that 2 of our schools send the most number of students to Oxford, more than any other English school. And I think that probably testifies to the quality of some of it. And I think we must not be shy about producing excellence. And similarly, several of our schools produce a large number of students who have gone to the Ivy League universities and our own universities. Now, one key reason why we've been able to do that, among many others, is that we have special intervention program early on, that we deeply believe that no child should be deprived due to financial needs. And in fact, we don't allow private schools. All our schools, except for 3 small ones, are state-funded and state-run. The Ministry of Education centrally posts teachers to ensure that you have an even quality across schools. And financial support is given to children from poorer background, and the preschool access is 99%. And we enhance teachers' quality and all that right through the system. Now, as a result of all this, over 95% of our students today not only complete the secondary school, but go on to post-secondary. And I think increasingly this will become more and more, this will become more and more important. That 10 years, 11 years of basic education is not enough. That I would like to see all our students go to post-secondary education. And today, 25% go to ITE, 40 to 45% in our polytechnics, and 30% in universities. We've just set up a committee headed by my deputy minister to look at expanding university places and looking at how we can further change these numbers to increase it further. Now, I would like to now touch on a topic on vocational and technical education and its relevance to industry and economic development. Now, our focus on technical and vocational education actually went back a long way, and thanks to the vision of our early founding fathers. So Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, for instance, had very early on said that every country wants to move on to higher technology and more value-addedness, but in the last analysis, it's the quality of technical education and training that will decide who has the better workers with the higher productivity. And he said this back in 1990. And we have not deviated much from this. Now, how do we deliver our technical and vocational educations through our polytechnics and ITEs? Let me say a few words about the 3 principles that guide us in this. First is a significant investment in the state-of-art infrastructure and the latest equipment, so that the learning environment is very authentic. Second, aligning the course curriculum and teaching with the latest industry developments. And third, tapping on industry expertise through extensive partnership. Let me give 3 examples of this industry partnership. First, the boards of our polytechnics and ITEs are chaired by captains of industry, and the vast majority of the members are from the industry. In fact, the Ministry of Education has only 1 representative in each of these boards, just to ensure alignments with what the rest is doing, but otherwise it's driven by the private sector. Second, each of our polytechnics and ITE have what we call advisory body, and if it may be, say, a hospitality course. And advisory bodies will consist of hotel managers and chefs and so on who supervise those operations, and they come in and tell us what exactly the industry needs. Third, we require our polytechnic and ITE lecturers to do industry projects together with their students. And to us, that is a critical test of how relevant they are. If a lecturer is not able to get an industry project because nobody wants to work with him, we know that he's out of date or that he's not able to teach his students well. So they are all required to do an industry project, and they go out together with them. So one very important thing that we had to do was to provide a state-of-the-art facility. These are our 3 Institute of Technical Education, and many visitors have remarked that they look better than most universities. In fact, I personally think that they look better than our national university. To my colleagues in NUS, I don't think you'll disagree with me, because these were purpose designed. The third one, at ITE Central, will be up next year. Incidentally, it is in the Prime Minister's constituency. But this is right in the center of Singapore. Similarly, we have 5 polytechnics. They were built over different times, so some of them are more modern than others, but all of them have the state-of-the-art equipment. Let me just show a few examples. On the top right, the culinary arts course, this is a purpose-built kitchen with videos which will record what students do and which will then allow students to learn. And it's a kitchen that is built and designed for teaching and for cooking. And then on the bottom panel, there is a specially imported mannequin that is used, that will respond to life-saving and where you can measure heart rates, breathing, and so forth, and to see whether, if a student were to do CPR, whether they succeeded in reviving that mannequin. And similarly, in the paramedical equipment, it is exactly what you would see, say, in an ambulance and in an emergency theater. I mentioned about our students, and our students, not only do our lecturers have to take projects, our students have to do industrial attachments. And this is what they have to do. They go out to industry, they work with industry for 6 months or 3 months, and learn what it is like to get your hands dirty and what it means to start work. Similarly, in the media course, they are given the equipment to do the video, to do the recording, and as if they were in a live theater. Yeah. And in one of the hotel courses, in the institute itself, we have a facility as if it was a check-in counter for a hotel, and in some, there's also a room, several rooms with beds and so on, to simulate what it is like if you have to make the beds, and then the lecturers can then supervise to see that everything is done according to the standards. So those are some examples, and they offer a wide range of different courses from engineering to services. Let me say a few words on our university. We now have 4 universities. NUS is the oldest, and then NTU. The Singapore Management University was the 3rd one, and the 4th, SUTD, Singapore University of Technology and Design. NUS is a comprehensive university, and it has moved up in the research ranking quite significantly in the last 5-6 years in particular, and is now ranked 2nd in Asia and 28th in the world. So both the universities are in the top 100 research-intensive university in the world. Singapore Management University, although new, has been ranked among the top in certain areas of economic research, particularly in econometrics. SUTD is an interesting university because it's a collaboration with MIT and with Zhejiang University in China. And the idea is to bring the best of East and West and the best of technology and entrepreneurship into university that will focus on technology and design. And we are in the process of looking at setting up a 5th university, which will probably be quite different because every university must be differentiated from the other university for it to be relevant. Now, those are what we have done over the years. Let me now say a few words about the future. And last year, we started this student-centric, values-driven education. Our aim is to nurture Singaporeans for a very different tomorrow. And why a very different tomorrow? Let me say a few words. If you look at the information explosion, I mean, it's just phenomenal. And you look at the curve, and as Eric Schmidt put it, every 2 days now, we create as much information as we did from the dawn of civilization up to 2003. Now, this change, I think, is going to drive a lot of social, political, and economic changes all around the world. And the nature of jobs and skills are likely to change. One estimate from an academic who has studied this is that 65% of the jobs that will be available in 10-15 years' time will not even be here today. And that this exponential increase in information means that the ability to process information is quite critical. And that hard skills are no longer enough. So that's one important change. We have been working on this idea of what are 21st century competencies. And we think that 21st century competencies comprise a number of key areas. First is a whole set of different cognitive abilities and skills. Creativity, critical thinking as a core, because you need to be able to do things quite differently. Second, information literacy. When you have an explosion of information, the ability to make sense of that information, to tell right from wrong, truth from untruth, to be able to connect the dots, to be able to make the best use of that information will be a key differentiator. And it is not just about accessing information on the net, but the ability to process, to synthesize, and to create new knowledge out of that. It will be quite critical. And third, global literacy and cultural awareness. And in the global literacy and cultural awareness area, we think that as a multiracial, multi-religious society, we should build on that and build on our extensive links. So today in our schools, 1/3 of our students are sponsored when they are in secondary school to go overseas. Whether on a student exchange or on a visit or whatever. And in our university, roughly 1/3 spend at least a semester or a stint abroad. And the NUS, for instance, have set up entrepreneurship center in Beijing for the students to be immersed in the environment and to understand what it is like to do business in a place like Beijing. And they join startup companies and so on to do that. So those are the three, I think, very critical literacy, together with all these other soft skills, teamwork, communications, and so on. Now, in an interesting way, the more the world changes and changes quickly, the more some things ought not to change. And so what are some of the things that we feel strongly that it ought not changed? And we think the things that ought not to change are about values. Because ultimately what defines us as a society are our values that we share as a society. And that what allows individuals to succeed at the end of the day is not just being smart, but having the right value. And so we have relaunched a very concerted effort on character and citizenship education. And character and citizenship education comprises several elements. One is helping students build personal qualities of grit, determination, resilience, so that they can succeed in a world where changes are happening faster. Second, building social moral values, responsibility, care, and concern for others, a willingness to chip in, to help others, and the better off they are, hopefully the more they do. And those form the core of the individual. And the other part of it is citizenship. We are a very young nation, and our people must feel that they are citizens of Singapore. And what does it mean to be a citizen of Singapore? So those are the things that we're hoping to do in character and citizenship education. And our schools now have a wide range of programs to promote this area and to nurture our young. And the other key thing is the student-centric education, which is, ultimately if we're able to tailor the education to individual child, looking at their strengths, their aspirations, and their potential, and that will be to us our ultimate success. And in that regard, developing the whole child and providing multiple pathways for success will be a very key part of our efforts going forward. Now let me say a few words about India. I've read a number of different reports on the very exciting changes they are going through. The numbers range from 12 to 20 million that will join the workforce every year, and that by 2020 you have something like 100 million young people who will join the workforce. And that is a huge demographic dividend. One calculation is that if you are able to reap the demographic dividend, GDP growth can be about 2% more per year. And in an economy like India with about $2 trillion of GDP, 2% a year will add up to about $40 billion every year. And if you think about it over just 10 years, that's $400 billion. You can do an enormous amount of things with $400 billion. So I think the investing in the young, investing in education to reap this demographic dividend is a very exciting opportunity. And you have this enormous potential to do and to make this very significant investment. So in that regard, I'm very happy that we are able to work with the Ministry of Labour and Employment and with the New Delhi government to start this World Skills Centre. I hope we can make a very small contribution to your overall efforts. So let me sum up by saying that first, if we look at what we have gone through over the years. We have put a very clear focus on the basics to build a strong foundation. Second, invest in technical and vocational education all along the way, and with a science and engineering and maths as a foundation. And third, moving further, developing the child holistically in a student-centric and a values-driven way, and so that they become good citizens of Singapore and good citizens of the world. So on that note, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Minister. And Mr. Dias, over to you for the question and answer session. Mr. Dias will moderate the question and answer session. Thank you.
How much time do we have, Sitara? You're the boss.
We have 15 to 16 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to be a
Thank
little
you.
polite by not stating 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. Minister, thank you so much for your amazing speech. Huge learning for all of us and what's happening in your education system in Singapore. And I'm one who's visited the ITE and have pushed very hard for IT type of institutions here. So I hope that the Delhi one will be only the first of many, and that we'll be able to do something like this all around the country. In the limited time that we have for questions, I want to turn first to a student. We have students from schools here. Aspen India has been running very successfully a Sri Ram Aspen Leadership School, which is a residential program for children in high school. And I'm going to ask Samyak Jain from the Leadership School to ask the first question of the Minister. Samyak, where are you? Okay, go ahead.
Good evening, sir. I wanted to ask that how has the shift in the value system of the youth generation, that is students of 14 to 18-year-old children, worked in Singapore, the present values being different from the values of your time?
Well, I think that's a very good question, which I'm also trying very much to understand. And first trying to understand my own children. I think I would say that my generation grew up at a time of, I would say, hardship and poverty. And so you find that it is a very different upbringing. By the time of, my children were brought up, Singapore has already progressed quite a bit. We are at a higher level of economic development. Today, when I visit schools, secondary schools, and every time I ask, how many of you have Facebook? Almost everyone will put up their hand. And one young lady told me that, I asked, how many friends do you have on Facebook? One of them, the average was 500. One lady had 2,500. And I say, how do you keep up with 2,500 people? I say, oh, that's part of my life now. We now have cable TVs of all kinds. And I think there's a lot of Western influence in our value system. So our society is changing quite a lot. But at the same time, I would say that because of our focus on Asian values and on bilingualism, there's still a very strong Asian core, and parents are still largely conservative. So when I mentioned about values education last year, I was quite happy that many people wrote to the press, wrote to me and so on, in support of this focus on basic values. And even students that I spoke to and teachers I spoke to were quite supportive. So I think it is a world where our youths are far more exposed. They are exposed to different points of view. Even in the teaching, I don't think it is possible to be didactic about it. One needs to reason and allow them to find their own way. I don't think in the teaching of values, for instance, one could do it the way that our parents did during our time. It is really about moral understanding and moral reasoning and getting them to internalize this. So some of the things that we try to do is to get them to serve in a community so that they appreciate what it is like to be in another person's shoe and to realize how to help others and how fortunate they are. So those are some of the changes that I see, that it is a generation that it grew up in greater comfort, more exposed to the world, more exposed through the internet, through Facebook and so on. And not a bad change, I would say. More critical, more creative as well. And in fact, we are trying to promote that. Therefore, the engagement will have to be quite different. And I hope that we can bring up another generation of young people who are still Asians, but with hopefully a global outlook and a deeper understanding of the world.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. Minister, because of my long association with Singapore, many of my friends talk to me about sending their children or their grandchildren to university in Singapore now. There is a new demand I see. I didn't get all these calls a few years ago. Would you say a little bit about your policy towards foreign students, and also in relation to the capacity that you have? I mean, do you have capacity for a lot of foreign students to go there, of course on the basis of merit? And how do you handle this issue?
Well, I think if you look at the capacity in the postgraduate courses, I think we probably have a lot more, not only just in our 4 universities, but also in the program that EDB runs called the Global Schoolhouse. So INSEAD, Chicago, Booth School, and several others are in Singapore. And so I think for that part of it, it is probably quite easy. For the undergraduate classes, it is probably a little, the requirements are a bit more stringent, because competition for entry into our local university is very stiff. As an MP, I get many of my residents who come to me to say, my kid didn't get into the university. You are the education minister, can you help? And I often refer it to the university, because I say I don't interfere in admission of students. And so, I will write an appeal, but it is the university who will consider. So we do have a percentage of places for foreign students, and we do have many Indian students already studying there. But I would say that the entry criteria have gone up over time, and therefore it's extremely competitive. Yeah. So we are working on, I mentioned about expanding university places, and that is one of the things that I think we should be able to say something probably towards the end of the year, if not earlier.
Thank you, Minister. Before we came in, Gautam Thapar was briefing you about this program that Aspen India has for young leaders who have achieved some success and are on the brink of going on to higher success. And I see here several of the guys from these classes sitting in the audience. And I see Tejpreet Chopra here, who was in the first class of ILI, and he was at that time president of GE India. Tejpreet, am I right? Would you like to put a question to the minister? He's one of our stars. Can you get the mic here, please?
Mr. Minister, first of all, wonderful to hear you speak and appreciate your thoughts. Would love to get your advice on what learnings that you've seen as a minister that we can adopt out here in our country to improve the education system out here. So in all your interaction with the Indian government, how do you see we can improve things out here in India?
Well, let me say that Tarun helped me a lot to understand India's economy and the various aspects. So it is very complex, and it took me 3 to 4 years to even just understand that part of it. So I won't dare to offer any advice about education system in India, simply because I don't know much about it. And my own experience is an education system is extremely complex. It is very much contextual as well to the political and social and economic context of the country. So I would say that there isn't a sort of one right solution to this. What I can share is that in the last 1 year, I've had many meetings with education ministers from all over the world, and we come together to talk about how we can make our systems better. I've had many interactions with academics who have studied this and look at, what makes for a good education system. And the one common thing that I've found throughout is that no education system can be better than the quality of your teachers. And investing in teachers is critical. And we have found that to be very true. For instance, today, we recruit from the top 1/3 of every cohort. And we train them intensely. So those with a graduate degree have to go on for a postgraduate degree in education. They spend a whole year, and they have to do a practicum. and I just launched a teacher growth model in Singapore to ensure that we have continuing education for our teachers. I deeply believe that you cannot be a good teacher unless you yourself is a model of lifelong learning. And there are so many changes going on in a way that technology has progressed, knowledge has progressed, and in our understanding of brain sciences and how people learn, how people memorize, how people become creative, process information, that unless we keep up with it, we can never do well. And you can have all kinds of video, on and try to teach that. But the real learning takes place in the classroom, in the interaction between the teacher and the student. And your body language with the students, how encouraging you are, your ability to sense whether the student have understood what you have said or not. All those goes into good teaching and good learning. So that's the only thing I can say, that, invest in good teachers.
Thank you, Minister. We have a very peculiar person in the room here. He combines two professions. He runs a very successful company, and he also teaches at Stanford. And his name is Naushad Forbes, and his hand is up. Naushad?
Thank you, Tarun. Minister, first of all, thank you for an address so full of insight. I particularly loved your quote that we must not be shy of excellence. That's one that I'm going to use quite often. It seems to me that in our country, we sometimes have this great conflict between chasing excellence and chasing inclusiveness. And this is a challenge in many places. How do you address this simultaneously? How do you achieve both inclusiveness and excellence at the same time?
I think that's a very good question, and in fact something that we give a lot of thought to. I think first, we must accept that not every child is the same. But at the same time, a good education system must believe, and a good teacher must believe, that every child can learn. And our job as educator is to make sure that we help every child to learn to the best of their ability. Some of our students learn much better through hands-on kinesthetic experiences. And we find that, for instance, in the students in the Institute of Technical Education. If you try and explain a concept in physics about speed of frictions in a very theoretical way, they found it hard to grasp. But done in a hands-on way, they get it immediately. And they can become very good at the subject, very good in particular areas of work. And we don't fully understand how the human brain works yet, but we know enough of it for us to make a difference. So an inclusive system must allow every child to progress to the best of their ability. Second, financial circumstances must not impede. Right? So regardless of family circumstances, we must do our best to help them. One area that we are looking at is preschool. For instance, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew has started a fund for bilingualism, of which I'm the chairman. And as a result of that work, I've been looking at how children acquire languages. And the scientific evidence is quite clear that the earlier we start, the better they do. So we are going to invest quite a bit in preschool learning of languages. And in fact, we've just called for proposals on how we can teach 2-3 languages as early as possible. So I think it is possible to be inclusive. But the second part of your question on how do we then encourage excellence is that I think as a social attitude, I will make a very clear distinction between the pursuit of excellence and elitism and snobbishness. In many of the systems that I've studied across the world, one problem is that students are put into elite schools and they develop a certain elitist attitude that we are separate from the rest of society, we are superior, and end up acquiring very snobbish habits. You see that in the debate in the UK recently over the GCSE and GCE O-level and so on. And therefore, in order to have the social consensus about excellence, it is important that our best students are also seen to be the ones to contribute most to society. And in fact, we put a lot of effort in getting our schools, especially the ones who are seen to be very good schools, to put a lot of effort in social work, in community work, and in trying to infuse in them and imbue in them, in our students, this sense that the more capable you are, the more you owe to society and the more you should contribute back. And that we should not be shy about excellence. Everyone, regardless of ability, should pursue excellence, to the best of your ability. Yeah.
Thank you. Minister, our 16 minutes that Sitara gave us is up. Okay. We have to step down. I have two concluding comments. One, thank you very much for a very thoughtful and a very, very knowledgeable exposition by a one-year-old education minister. And two, I think Singapore is very lucky to have you as education minister. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a big hand.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Mr. Das. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of ISAS and ASPEN Institutes India, I once again thank the Minister for spending his valuable time with us. Thank you, Minister. Thank you so much.